So in the last video, I talked about the 9 parries that I use in my system. Now, some of you have already noticed that my style of fence is a little bit unique in the way that I conduct myself and the techniques that I use. But understand, none of the 9 parries in my system are actually anything that I have invented myself. They are instead a collection of knowledge that I have pulled from various sources over the last 33 years of my learning. But the reason for that video was so that everybody could be on the same page when I explain in this video, which is in response to a question from a student about what ripostes are available from the 9 parries in your system. So that's what I'm going to talk about with you today. Now, it has to be understood first and foremost that what I'm about to show you are some of the most basic ripostes that you can do from each of these 9 parries. The reason why I'm sticking to just the basic ripostes, because there are indeed more advanced tactics and techniques that I use from these different parries, but because of the fact that this video doesn't cover down on what those techniques are, I'm going to keep it just to the simple ones, which you're also going to find are oftentimes the fastest because they are indeed the most simple. First, let's talk about parry 1. Now, the thing I like about parry 1 is that it is an all-encompassing parry that covers the entirety of the left side of my body. Now, from that, it opens up your opponent for a beautiful moulinet cut right down the middle. Now, don't forget that while you are moving into that particular technique, that you still have to control your opponent's weapon. If you just let it go, you open yourself up to the possibility of a thrust being redirected at you, or at the very least taking a minor cut. And since we want to make sure that our opponents are the only ones that are being struck, we want to make sure that we do this the right way. Now, parry 2 is one that I use whenever I see my opponent, most oftentimes when I see my opponent, utilizing an extended arm in the midst of their guard. This really opens them up to the possibility of a gathering and then my thrusting point headed right for their face. You can also use this in order to intercept an incoming thrust, but because of the fact that parry 2 is a little bit narrow, you want to be cautious about that because it doesn't offer a whole lot of gathering space on that weapon. But if your opponent is already offering you an extended arm, this is a really good way to go. Parry 3 is one that, as I said in the last video, is a parry that I use for whatever reason you and your opponent got too close together and you don't have the room in order to do a parry 6. So from that parry 3, no different than you are from a parry 6, you can drop that point down into your opponent's head. Parry 4 is a very simple riposte possible from that, and it's also very short and very fast. You move into a parry 4 position and you drop that point into your opponent's head. Parry 5 is a little bit more involved in terms of you're going to use this most often when you are defending yourself against a cut from your opponent. Now, from that cut, however, and there are a great many things that you can do from this position that your opponent's really not going to like, we're going to stick to what is very simple. Parry 6 is a very simple attack. You move into that parry position and you drop that arm forward into your opponent's head or chest. Parry 7 is a low guard parry. It protects the legs. Once you have actually parried your opponent into that, and remember, when you do this riposte, you still want to make sure that you're covering yourself. So place that open hand or that dagger or baton, whatever it is you have in your offhand, into the proper position to cut off the secondary route, and then take that sword and shove it into your opponent's leg. If your opponent can't walk, they can't fight. Similarly, parry 8, you catch your opponent to the left side low and you put your hand, your dagger, whatever it is that you have, into the proper position to cut off that higher ground, and then you shove that sword into your opponent's leg. Again, if your opponent can't move, opponent can't fight. And lastly is parry 9. Now this one is fairly good for after you have extended your thrust against your opponent. If they successfully parry you, use that contact in order to your best benefit, so when you feel the movement moving up the length of your sword, you drop into a parry 9, and then from there, replacing and cutting. You can do that across your opponent's abdomen, you can do that up into the head. It's really a dealer's choice at that point in time, but it's a very effective parry, mostly because of the fact that it is faster even than a parry 4 from that parried extension, but you want to make sure that you're still doing it correctly so that you're not being struck at the same time as your opponent. So I hope that this video has helped to clarify what some of the riposting options are available from each of these different 9 parries. Remember, there are a great many options available from each of these parries, but those are more advanced techniques and tactics, and I'll be talking about those in a later video. Also too, if you're really interested in finding out what those are and how I do what I do, I've got a book coming out in the first quarter of 2022, and you're going to find a whole lot of information, not just these short videos, but a much more in-depth analysis and look at the how, why, and what it is that I'm doing.